On a crisp, wind-stirred afternoon in early October, the kind of day where the amber leaves of the capital seemed to drift through history itself, an elderly man named Elijah Mercer sat in solitude on a stone bench near the Lincoln Memorial, his body cloaked in a long, time-worn coat, and his head crowned with a faded black cap, embroidered with the insignia of a forgotten campaign and ribbons dulled by decades. The sun, low and golden, stretched long shadows across the National Mall, as if time itself were bowing its head in reverence to the past he carried. Elijah, 78 years old, and weathered not just by age, but by the burden of memory, sat quietly, his posture dignified yet weary, his eyes, clouded with age but sharpened by experience, fixed on the glimmering expanse of the reflecting pool, where countless images of presidents, protests, and patriotism had once shimmered, but where today only the ghost of his youth looked back at him. He had been here before in this very spot, as a young soldier returning from war unnoticed and uncelebrated, his uniform freshly stained with jungle sweat and the invisible scars of duty, surrounded by a nation still uncomfortable with the face of a black war hero. The world had turned many times since then, but Elijah had remained a man of purpose, never seeking recognition, never demanding applause, just peace, just silence, just the quiet understanding that he and his brothers had once held the line where others feared to walk. Tourists passed without noticing him. A few cast fleeting glances at his cap, perhaps wondering vaguely about the man behind the uniform, but quickly moved on, drawn instead to the towering marble monuments and picture-perfect backdrops of American grandeur. Yet none paused long enough to see the veteran beneath the surface, the man who had once led classified missions through the heart of enemy territory with a precision and courage unmatched even in elite circles. And then, as if summoned by fate itself, a unit of young Navy SEALs emerged from the tree-lined walkway, their dress uniforms crisp, their movements disciplined and sharp, the future of America's defense embodied in their stride. But among them one man noticed, truly noticed. Lieutenant Mason Reeves, a towering figure with piercing grey eyes and a quiet intensity born not just from training but from reverence. Mason's gaze locked onto the small yet unmistakable ink, peeking from beneath Elijah's rolled sleeve. An insignia so rare, so feared, and so whispered about in classified circles that it might as well have been a myth. The emblem of black. Sword Recon, an elite all-black special operations unit formed during Vietnam under the radar, known for missions so dangerous that even SEALs today referred to them only with hushed respect. Mason stopped mid-step, causing a ripple in the unit's formation, and turned back toward the old man on the bench, heart thudding in his chest not from fear, but from awe. Could it be? Could this man, this quiet, unnoticed elder, be one of them? One of the Black Sword? Training memories flooded Mason's mind, his instructor's trembling voice as he spoke of a unit that could vanish into the jungle like mist, that completed suicide missions with 100% success, and that disappeared from the official record, not because they failed, but because their success terrified those in power. Mason approached slowly, his voice catching in his throat, his salute automatic. "Sir," he said barely above a whisper, "were you Black Sword Recon?" Elijah turned his head, slowly and deliberately, and met the young officer's gaze with a calm that silenced even the restless wind. "A long time ago," he said, the gravel of age in his voice unable to blunt the steel of pride. "Too long." A silence fell between them, charged not with awkwardness but with history, a generational torch being recognized, perhaps even passed, without ceremony or trumpet. Mason's fellow SEALs gathered behind him, eyes wide, recognizing not the man Elijah had become, but the ghost of every lesson they'd been taught about honor, sacrifice, and forgotten heroes. Elijah offered a faint smile, one corner of his lips lifting just enough to let the years melt away, and with a quiet dignity, he rolled up his sleeve to fully reveal the tattoo, a sword broken at the hilt, surrounded by the Latin words in umbra. Invictus, in shadow unconquered. Mason's breath caught. He had seen that very image once, etched into the stone wall of a hidden corridor in the SEAL training facility, marked with a warning, not to be spoken of lightly. "You inspired us," Mason said, eyes damp with reverence. We were told, the Black Sword was legend, but you're real, you're here. Elijah nodded slowly, his eyes not leaving Mason's. We were real, he said, and forgotten. But not broken. Mason stepped back and saluted again, this time with the weight of every seal behind him. And as he held that salute, tourists began to slow, sensing something powerful unfolding, something not part of any guidebook, but part of a deeper American story. Some removed their hats, others simply stood still, moved by the sight of an old black veteran being honored by warriors of the present. Elijah stood slowly, a bit unsteady, but taller somehow in the moment, as if the years had peeled back. And as the young SEAL and the aging soldier stood together in the golden light of fading day, bound by legacy, sacrifice, and a tattoo that refused to be erased, a silent truth echoed louder than any anthem. Some heroes are forged in darkness, but they shine brightest when finally seen. The silence that followed the moment at the Lincoln Memorial lingered like a sacred echo in Elijah Mercer's chest, reverberating with the weight of history and memory as he sat again, this time not in isolation, but with the presence of a young SEAL named Mason Reeves seated beside him, a symbol of the past and present finally intertwined in public view. Elijah wasn't used to being seen, not truly, not beyond the old man passerby assumed he was, yet here was this decorated officer, who saw him fully, not just as a man but as a monument in flesh, one of the last living links to an elite force most people never knew existed. They sat for what felt like a lifetime and a breath, both men immersed in quiet contemplation as the world around them seemed to rearrange itself, realigning history with truth, until Mason finally broke the silence, not with more praise or awe, but with a question so sincere that it disarmed the hardened edge Elijah wore like armor. Will you tell me what happened? Elijah took a slow breath, nodding as if weighing not just the words but the consequences of releasing them into the air, where silence had once ruled. It started in '68, Elijah began, his voice rough but steady. In a jungle so thick, daylight didn't matter. We were ghosts, son. The government didn't call us soldiers. They called us assets, disposable. We were the ones they sent in when everyone else failed. His eyes narrowed as memories surged like floodwaters. Dark green terrain, the crackle of radios, the weight of M16s, and the constant thrum of insects that never stopped screaming. They trained us off the books, away from bases, on ground, soaked with old blood. We weren't supposed to exist, black soldiers with skills equal to and often surpassing the best white units, but without the medals or the parades. We were told we were shadows. We were told the only way home was through silence, and we believed it. Mason sat perfectly still, knowing better than to interrupt, his breath held as Elijah's story unfolded like an ancient scroll, finally unrolled. We called ourselves Black Sword because that's what we were. Sharp, deadly, and forged in fire. 10 of us, no backup, no air support, just orders to neutralize threats in territory so hostile, even maps wouldn't claim it. Elijah's voice drifted momentarily, lost in an image burned into his mind. A village torched and smoking, a child clutching a toy carved from bone, and the eyes of his friend Raymond as he carried him out under mortar fire. But what they didn't plan on was that we wouldn't die. They expected us to vanish one way or another, but we kept coming back, kept surviving, kept succeeding, and that scared them more than any enemy. Mason's fists clenched subtly, not in anger toward Elijah, but toward the injustice baked into the soil of the story. The mission that broke us, Elijah said, was deep in the Ashau Valley. Intelligence said there was a secret Viet Cong command center protected by locals who'd been brainwashed into fanaticism. They weren't fighters, they were victims. But orders were clear: destroy everything. When we got there, it wasn't a base. It was a hospital, women, children, elders, all sick, all hiding, all begging us not to call in the airstrike. And Raymond, he said no. He called it in, but not to drop bombs. He called for extraction. That disobedience saved them. But it damned us. Elijah paused, the old pain cracking through his composure. They court-martialed him behind closed doors, said we disobeyed a direct order, said we exposed ourselves. But they didn't write that in the report. No, they erased us, called the mission a failure and marked our unit as MIA. That's why no one knows us. Mason's voice trembled as he finally spoke. "You saved lives and they punished you for it?" Elijah nodded slowly. "We weren't the heroes they wanted. We were the truth they feared." As the sun began to dip lower, casting warm gold, across the water a small crowd gathered again, not drawn by cameras or announcements, but by reverence, by the energy that surrounds moments when justice meets memory. A young girl approached shyly, holding her father's hand, and asked if Elijah was famous. He smiled and shook his head. "No, sweetheart. I just didn't die when I was supposed to." Her father knelt beside her and whispered, "This man is the reason others came home." Mason looked to Elijah, then back to the crowd, realizing that silence would no longer protect this story. It was time to speak, to record, to remember. He made a vow right there. He would advocate for Black Sword Recon to be recognized, not just in military records but in museums, history books, and training manuals. And more importantly, he would tell every SEAL he trained that real valor isn't measured by medals. It's carried in scars that history tried to erase. Elijah leaned back against the bench, tired but lighter, as if every word had peeled away. "A piece of the burden." "Funny thing about shadows," he said softly. "The darker they are, the more you know there's light nearby." And as dusk wrapped itself around the city, two soldiers sat shoulder to shoulder, not separated by rank, race, or generation, but united by the truth that some legends walk among us, quietly waiting to be seen. The moment at the Lincoln Memorial had sparked a wave of unexpected attention that rippled far beyond the quiet benches and marble columns where Elijah Mercer had spent decades fading into the background of history. And as news spread through military channels and veterans groups, a remarkable convergence of stories, memories, and emotions began to swell, igniting a conversation not only about one man or one unit, but about the countless forgotten Black soldiers whose sacrifices had been systematically buried beneath layers of silence and neglect. Mason Reeves found himself thrust into a new role, not just as a Navy SEAL officer, but as an advocate, a witness, and a bridge between generations. And alongside Elijah, they navigated a labyrinth of bureaucracy and resistance, confronting old prejudices and new indifferences alike. The Department of Defense, initially hesitant and evasive, was forced to acknowledge the existence of Black Sword Recon, their records dusted off and scrutinized by a new generation eager to rewrite history with truth and honor, while veterans who had once stood in the shadows came forward with testimonies that painted a vivid, painful picture of valor, obscured by racial discrimination and political expediency. Elijah and Mason attended hearings, ceremonies, and interviews, each event a battleground of its own, where memory clashed with official narrative and where the scars of the past still ached beneath polished surfaces. Mason learned more about Elijah's life beyond the battlefield, the loneliness that came with invisibility, the struggle to find work and respect after service, the way society had dismissed a Black veteran's dignity in an era of segregation and unrest. Elijah, in turn, was moved by the determination of the young SEALs who sought to honor the past, not just in words but in action, organizing memorials, educational programs, and initiatives to ensure that Black Sword Recon's legacy would no longer be a footnote but a cornerstone of military history. Together they faced resistance, some officials wary of upsetting established narratives, some communities uncomfortable confronting uncomfortable truths, but each challenge only strengthened their resolve. Meanwhile, Mason introduced Elijah to his family, bridging the generational divide, and the old veteran found a renewed sense of purpose and belonging in the warmth of friendship and shared mission. The media spotlight illuminated their journey, with interviews and features that portrayed Elijah not as a relic, but as a living testament to resilience and courage, inspiring not just military personnel, but civilians grappling with issues of race, identity, and justice. At Arlington National Cemetery, a special event was planned, an unveiling of a commemorative plaque honoring Black Sword Recon alongside other revered units, attended by dignitaries, veterans, and families. The day was heavy with emotion. Elijah stood proudly, surrounded by those who once had been his comrades in arms, and those who had become allies in his fight for recognition. The plaque was unveiled with a solemn salute, and as the crowd dispersed, Elijah and Mason shared a quiet moment, reflecting on how far they had come and the road still ahead. "We changed the story," Mason said softly. Elijah nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Not just ours, all of ours." The chapter closed not with an end, but with a beginning, a promise that history's shadows would no longer hide the light of those who bore the sword in silence. The journey from obscurity to recognition was not just a battle fought in courtrooms or on ceremonial stages for Elijah Mercer, but a profound transformation of his own identity and the collective consciousness of those around him. As the once solitary veteran who had silently borne the weight of decades of erasure, now found himself at the center of a movement, rewriting the narrative of black soldiers in American history, a movement fueled by the determination of young warriors like Mason Reeves, who saw in Elijah's story not only a heroic past, but a roadmap for courage, honor, and truth in the present day. The nation began to listen, as documentaries aired and books were published, each recounting the daring missions of Black Sword Recon, exposing the racial injustices and forgotten valor that had shadowed their legacy, and communities across the country held commemorations, creating spaces where veterans like Elijah could finally share their stories without fear or dismissal. Elijah's health, weathered by years of combat and neglect, often reminded him of his mortality, yet his spirit remained unbroken, sustained by the growing chorus of respect and remembrance. He traveled to military academies to speak, inspiring young cadets who had never heard of the Black Sword, and awakening a sense of duty to honor all who serve, regardless of color or creed. Meanwhile, Mason and Elijah worked to establish a foundation dedicated to supporting veterans of color, advocating for equitable treatment in veteran services, healthcare, and education, their collaboration a beacon of hope for those still fighting battles far from the battlefield. The friendship between the aging warrior and the rising SEAL grew deeper, a testament to the power of understanding across generations and races, a bridge between history and the future. Together they confronted not only external obstacles, but internal wounds, memories of loss, pain, and isolation that only comradeship could begin to heal. As the years passed, Elijah's legacy took on a life of its own, inspiring art, music, and scholarship that celebrated the heroism long hidden beneath layers of silence. The tattoo that once froze a young SEAL in awe became a symbol of resilience and pride, emblazoned on banners, murals, and uniforms, a lasting emblem of the shadows cast by history, now illuminated by truth. And though Elijah eventually passed, his story did not end with his final breath. It became a living testament to the power of recognition, the necessity of remembrance, and the unyielding spirit of those who serve in silence until their moment to be seen arrives. Mason, carrying forward the torch, ensured that the Black Sword story remained etched, not just in stone but in the hearts and minds of every generation that followed, a legacy forged in shadows but shining forever bright as a beacon of justice and honor for all.